Now we will review early sexuality research and the people who did it, just to give you an idea of the history of this subject. Attempts to study human sexual behavior systematically date back at least to the ancient Greeks. Physicians like Hippocrates and philosophers like Plato and Aristotle are the forefathers of sexuality research. They made extensive observations, and they offered the first elaborate theories regarding sexual responses and dysfunctions, reproduction and contraception, abortion, sexuality legislation, and ethics. The Roman and Greek physicians, Cyrenus and Galen, further advanced sexual knowledge. Their work prompted later Islamic scholars to address many sexual questions. Greek, Roman, and Islamic studies became standard texts at medical schools and stimulated the rebirth of anatomical research in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. In the 19th century, there were new concerns about overpopulation and sexual psychology that intensified efforts to study sexuality. And at the turn of the 20th century, sexuality investigations became a legitimate endeavor in their own right. Richard von Krafft-Ebing, born in 1840 and died in 1902, wrote during time when the Victorian standards strongly suppressed thinking about sexuality. Since he was a product of his time and a physician who worked mostly with sexually disturbed people, his writings indicated that sexual activity is something to fear. He wrote the best-selling treatise entitled Psychopathia Sexualis in 1886 that dealt with sexual disorders. It was a compendium of 237 case histories illustrating all kinds of sexual deviations, including masturbation, homosexuality, transvestism, fetishism, exhibitionism, pedophilia, bestiality, sadism, masochism, necrophilia, sexual fixation upon corpses, and coprophilia, which is a sexual fixation on feces, and sexual murder. One of the cases he looked at was Jack the Ripper. A great part of the book's appeal were the graphic accounts of these deviations, some of which would have been shocking even today. As mentioned before, Krafft-Ebing claimed the right to name sexual disorders and to diagnose people who suffered from them. He supported the double standard, whereby men have sexual freedoms that women do not, and he may have supported this due to his apparent discomfort with the sexuality of women. He had a great influence on physicians as well as the public, and he seemed to be biased and made some false assumptions, but his writings convinced some physicians and researchers that the study of sexuality was in fact legitimate. He prepared the way for Havelock Ellis and Freud. Henry Havelock Ellis, born in 1859, died in 1939, was an English psychologist and physician who studied sexuality. He grew up in fear of what he had been told about the danger of nocturnal emissions. He was also concerned about his general ignorance of human sexuality. From 1896 until 1910, he published a 6-volume series called Studies in the Psychology of Sex, which included the following beliefs. First, masturbation is common for both sexes. Second, orgasm in males and females is very much the same. Third, homosexuality and heterosexuality are a matter of degree. He believed that women do have sexual desire contrary to Victorian thought. He felt that there was no one norm for human sexuality and that thoughts and acts vary among individuals and cultures. He believed that there should be sexuality education for both sexes starting at early ages, and he felt that there should not be laws against contraception or private sexual behavior. He wrote about sexual behavior from an anthropological, cultural, psychological, and medical viewpoint. His findings are mostly from case studies and life histories. He approached sexual phenomena from experience or experiment, and he used personal experiences for research purposes. He discussed nocturnal emission, masturbation, and other sexual behaviors, and he concluded a wide variation in normal sexual behavior existed. Two aspects made his writing significant. First, it provided accurate information from a somewhat scientific viewpoint, and second was his ability to divorce himself from the repressive Victorian climate of his time. Keep in mind that Victorian society defined sexuality in negative terms, labeling many behaviors as diseases and deviations. He influenced many of the attitudes about sexuality that were held in society. His ideas were controversial and ahead of their time, particularly his support for sexuality education. Some people still have trouble accepting his beliefs. He influenced later pursuits of many sexuality researchers and writers. Next comes Sigmund Freud, born in 1856 and 1939, then died in 1939. He was a psychological researcher, as I'm sure you realize, and he developed theories about human development, personality, and psychopathology that have influenced our thinking. According to Freud, to develop into a well-adjusted person, he said one had to progress successfully through a number of psychosexual stages. He viewed sexuality and sexual pleasure as a central part of human life, and he felt that people naturally sought to have as much pleasure and as little pain as possible. He indicated that sexual activity was natural and that procreation was secondary to pleasure, and he cautioned against severe restrictions on sexual instincts. He said that people could become neurotic if they were denied the natural expression of their sexual instincts. An important contribution of his was that he suggested that early childhood experiences had strong consequences for adult functioning. Largely due to his work, sexual thoughts and behaviors are still considered to be major influences on contemporary life in general. Freud was a significant figure and one who is controversial even today in some respects.